A few weeks ago I made a video of me and my friend Kevin from Dirt Bike and Fab rebuilding my engine after it had 600 hours on it. One of you mentioned in the comments that I should do a video explaining more on how I got this bike to 600 hours before doing the first major rebuild. Since it's common for a bike to blow up around 50 to 100 hours, I'm going to be sharing some of the reasons as to why this bike got to 600 hours. It is a 2018 KTM 252 stroke. One of the reasons this bike got to 600 hours is just because of the bike itself. A two-stroke engine is built with a lot of simplicity, and the more simplicity, the less there is to go wrong. Plus, a two-stroke engine design has been one of the oldest designs there is, so it's had more than enough time for all the issues to be sorted out. Another thing worth noting is where it is a 252-stroke engine, it has a lot of power, more than I need, which means that most of the time I'm only using 30 to 50% of this bike's power, meaning that the engine is only having to give 30 to 50% of its efforts. So it's not being pushed to the limits all that often, which obviously makes the engine last longer. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some times where I'll be climbing a hill and I am pushing the engine to its limits, but a majority of the time I'm just practicing technique and I'm really not making the engine work that hard. It is also KTM's motocross model. I like the motocross model because it works best for the type of freeriding I do, but I also like it because they've left the motocross model very simple. It doesn't have TPI fuel injection system and it doesn't have any electronics. So, once again, the less it takes to make the bike work, the less things that are going to go wrong. Some people say not to worry about breaking in an engine, and a lot of people don't take the time to properly warm up their bike before riding. When I bought this bike new, and when I've done top-end rebuilds on this bike, I've followed a break-in routine. It probably won't be the end of the world if you don't follow a break-in routine, but it will allow the metals to properly heat up for the first few times, as well as allow everything to wear in properly without causing any premature wear. I also like to take the time to properly warm up the engine before I ride. The reason I like to take the time to let this bike properly warm up before I ride is because the piston and the rings will heat up and expand before the cylinder, causing premature wear or just seizing it up altogether. So by allowing time for the cylinder to properly heat up and expand, you can just avoid that problem altogether. Maintenance on a bike is probably the most beneficial factor when it comes to the overall longevity of a bike. I usually change the transmission oil every 10 to 15 hours. How often I clean the air filter just depends on how the current riding conditions are. Like if it's really dusty, I might clean the air filter every 2 to 5 rides. If it's not very dusty, I might be able to get 10 or 20 rides out of the air filter before it needs to be cleaned. I also include top-end rebuilds in the regular maintenance category. I usually get 150 hours out of a piston before I change it. Depending on how hard the engine is being used, it may need to be sooner. All that really matters is, once I know the engine's starting to get a lot of hours on it, I'll start pulling the pipe off and looking inside the cylinder to check for, like wear, burn marks, scratches, that sort of thing. A mistake that I made was not having the cylinder sent off to get new Nicosil, because the only reason that I had to rebuild this bike at 600 hours, or do a full engine rebuild anyways, was because the Nicosil had wore so thin that it was allowing space for the piston to start rocking back and forth, which caught on the intake ports and sort of chipped away at the piston, sending metal chunks all through the engine. And if I had sent the cylinder off to get new Nicosil on it, it probably would have got even more hours out of it. Something really cool that's worth noting about all the bikes made by KTM, including Gas and Husqvarna, is that they make a stage 1 piston and a stage 2 piston. What this does is you start out with a stage 1 piston in a new cylinder, and once the cylinder gets about, I don't know, anywhere over 70 hours, that Nickel coating has wore itself a little bit more thin. So then you can put a stage 2 piston in it, which is just slightly larger, and it will fit nice and snug in that cylinder even though it's slightly wore out. My plan of action moving forward with this bike is to start out with a stage 1 piston in a new cylinder or a newly coated cylinder with, new Nickel. And then as it begins to wear out, the next time I rebuild the top end, I'll put a stage 2 piston in it so it's still fitting nice and snug in there. Once that top end is wore out and I need to rebuild it, then I will send the cylinder off to get new Nickel coating on it and start out with the stage 1 piston and just repeat that cycle once again. For engine oil, I like to run Maxima Formula K2. I've just heard that it's really good oil for the newer 2-stroke engines. And I like to mix it, the manual says to mix it 60-1. I like to mix it 50-1 because the more oil in the engine, the easier it is on parts. And it's not really enough to notice a performance difference. And then for gas, I just run regular 91 octane pump gas with ethanol in it. If I could find a higher octane without ethanol, I would run that, but living in a small town, I just take what I can get, and I haven't had any problems so far. For transmission oil, I like to use the Bellray 80-weight Gear Saver. It's pretty good oil. My clutch cover says use Motor X oil only, but don't be fooled, that's just KTM's brand, and as long as you're using a high quality oil, it doesn't really matter. This clutch has 600 hours on it. I didn't replace anything like the plates until 600 hours. And even then I only did it because I had everything taken apart and I said why not. But there was really nothing wrong with the clutch, so it's worked out good. And that pretty much covers it for the history of this engine. All these little variables can seem kind of pointless in the moment, but over time they add up big time for the longevity of the engine. Believe it or not, I'm not a 19-year-old kid who's figured out everything there's to know about dirt bikes. Crazy, I know, but I just am learning as I go, and I'm sharing what I'm learning with you guys, and I'm not really claiming to have any magic formula to getting your bike to last forever. It could be 100% luck that this bike didn't blow up at 50 hours. Who knows?